Greetings everyone and welcome back to 365 Days of Prog. Today we're going to be reviewing part of the second by Maudlin of The Well. Hi, my name's Naomi. I'm an avid progressive rock fan, but I'm a long ways from knowing all the prog albums out there. But this year, I'm gonna give it a try. This is 365 Days of Prog. Don't expect me to say almost any song title from this album. They are all so long and convoluted, there is no way I'm gonna memorize them in any way, so just enjoy them. Hopefully I can even get them into the favorite bits because they're so freaking long. Anyway, here are some of my favorite bits from this album. So I'll start this review by telling you all that every single one of the 5 songs found on this album have at least one favorite bit from them. Now in all honesty, I would have actually incorporated more favorite bits into this, but the thing is I would say that they sounded quite similar to one another and I just didn't want to bore you all, so I just gave you a few taste examples from this entire album. But nonetheless, let's talk about the creators of this album, the band called Maudlin of The Well. Now the band themselves actually mentioned that their goal was never to create their own original music, but instead to bring back already existing music from another plane of existence. And their way of doing so is by means of astral projection and lucid dreaming. I am not gonna comment on that, okay? I think I'll just leave it at that. Now Maudlin of The Well are a post-metal or avant-garde band which formed in 1996, and in 1999 they released their first album mostly comprised out of demos they've been working on for a while. And in the year of 2001 they would go on to release 2 separate albums which would be their last releases up until 2003, a year in which they would actually disband. And in that time of disbanding, one of the founder members of Maudlin of The Well, called Toby Driver, would actually go ahead and create a new group which would be sort of a spin-off group to Maudlin themselves called Kyo Dot. Now Kyo Dot themselves actually create music which is kind of similar to Maudlin of The Well, but with their own unique twists. But in 2008, a miracle happened in what might be called down the road as one of the biggest highlights of progressive metal in this entire century, and that is that Maudlin of The Well actually refounded again in their old form, actually reformed again, and this time they had a call out for their fans, seeking for them to help them financially support creating a new album. And the loyal fan base actually supported them and gave them the money they needed to create this new album, and on May 14th, 2009, the band released their 4th studio album called Part the Second, which is also the one that we are reviewing today, and as a way of repaying their loyal fans, they actually released this one for free for download on their own website, and thus they gave back their own appreciation. And when I read this, I just thought to myself, you know what, this is really heartwarming. This is what community of music is all about, and this is just a fantastic way of showing just that. Now coming back, Maudlin of The Well actually saw a very interesting change of sound, this time being a lot more symphonic with their sound as well as being more mellow, to the point where you couldn't even really call this album being a metal album. Personally, I don't think this one even kinda categorizes as hard prog. I would have to say that the music on here is actually most akin to space rock, and just the ethereal vibe that everything has, much more like the later works of Pink Floyd. But I think that the main aspect of this album, more than its spacey ambience, is actually the avant-garde nature of it, and that's what also makes it far away from the Pink Floyd sound. Nothing about this album is conventional, it is very complex, it is very tight, it is very innovative, but as a whole it somehow still manages to be quite accessible even for persons who aren't accustomed for this kind of music. And this album opens up with a track with a title that's so long that I wouldn't even try memorizing it in any way, and they claim it to be one of those excerpts that they actually located. And this song definitely made my jaw drop. I didn't quite know what I was listening to, but at the same time I knew that I wanted to dwell deeper and deeper into that sound. This first track and the one that comes after it, both being very interesting excerpts, are very symphonic, very interesting, and have a very nice flow to them despite containing various musical ideas that seemingly are just unrelated to one another. And the one word that I would have to say that describes this music really well is of course being very colorful. It has a lot of different melodical ideas as well as various ambience and as well as an emotional range. Now that's something that you don't really get to see a lot in music, but this album has a lot of it. I felt a lot when listening to the music. I was guided and my emotions was guided by the sounds of part the second. And of course I believe that there are many positives for this album, but the one thing that I really enjoyed about this one, and it might be kind of basic to say, but I really enjoyed the violin playing by Mia Mitsumiya. Despite there also being a cello incorporated, which adds a very interesting deeper sound on here, I think that the violin parts are the ones that just made my heart melt, and thus it led to my favorite song from this album being Rose Quartz Turning to Glass. This track in particular just has it all. It is very fun to listen to. It has a huge lengthy violin section on it, which is also led by various ambient sounds and keyboards, and it is just a perfect thing to listen to, which I really had a good time with it. But unfortunately the last two tracks on this album, despite being as complex and tight as the rest of this album and very creative and colorful, were just kind of boring to listen to in some way. I found myself zoning out of them for many instances, and that's especially a shame because I really enjoyed what came before it. I think that I could make the argument that this album was definitely overwhelming, but in a way that I don't usually see on most albums. Nothing about it was too bombastic, too over the top, too hard to listen to in one sitting. There was just so much in it that at some point my brain was still stuck with like 2 songs back, but I still had to keep up with the song I'm listening to now. But there was so much to digest with this album that in all honesty what I should have done is just pause the album, taken a break, and then come back to finish it with the last 2 tracks, and maybe then I'll get a refreshment out of it and I would review them otherwise. But as it happens right now, I don't see myself coming for these 2 last ones, but I do think that I'll have to listen to this album yet again at some given point. But as far as avant-garde albums go, and especially on this list, I think that this is the most interesting and special one I've listened to so far. Nothing about it feels quirky, nothing about it feels like they're doing it for the sake of experimentation and for no real musical value. Everything on here is definitely intrinsically interesting, and I really like that. And when it comes to avant-garde music, I think that this is a flagship album to represent it. But honestly, just get rid of the metal classification because this album just doesn't fit that category anymore. So this album cover was actually made by Toby Driver himself, so much like First Utterance by Comus, there is a person who is both a very talented musician but also a very talented arts person. Now, I think it's pretty safe to assume that taking this drawing of the cover and the name of this album is supposed to represent basically 25 separate frames of one singular animation. So of course what I did, what everyone would do in the case of listening to this album, I went into Photoshop and I took each and every individual frame, I cut it out, then I took the individual frames, put them into an editing software, created a 1 second long loop because this one is called Parting adding the second, so I can only assume it's just 1 second long, and I was left with a result that looks kinda like this. I don't know what about you, but I think that this is pretty cool. Now, I don't know what about you, but I think that as a concept for an album cover, this is really cool. And even if you don't go ahead and actually do the conversion like I did it, you can still see the progression, the linear progression that there is on this cover, and you can get a sense of liveliness from it, seeing as something is actually happening. And seeing as this album has shown Maudlin of the Well actually growing out of their metal frame, I think that this cover also quite well represents that, not being your average metal album cover, but instead being something more fluid and much more avant-garde. So this album, despite me having a lot of appreciation towards it, I think it is still very much not in my comfort zone, so it will be getting a very out of my comfort zone rating of 7 out of 10. Now, in all honesty, I wasn't intending on doing this pun, like I really wasn't thinking that it would be a pun, so no pun intended when I tell you that tomorrow's episode is gonna be about +4626 Comfort Zone by the band Beardfish. I of course want to thank my lovely supporters over on Patreon, so thank you so much to Clay Wallum and Wrist of Kings, you are the best, and if any of you want to support me over on Patreon, you can find the link down in the description or in my about page. But that's about it guys, have a wonderful day and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Bye guys.